Hello. Oh. Hello, and welcome to the 5.5, your midweek break. I'm Lisa Graves, and I'm here along with Nadine Smith. And we also want to do a shout out to Greg O'Lear and Elby for inviting us to host this Wednesday night show. Nadine.
Hey there. Every week we break down 5 stories, 8 minutes each. It's a chance to slow down, refuel, and remember you are not alone. And we always end with a segment we call the glass half full, a reminder that there's reason for hope every single day. Lisa, how are you?
I'm doing okay, although I have a little frog in my throat, but I think it's just because I'm nervous. This is show number 2, and I just want to thank the viewers who've tuned in and who watch later, and it's a joy to work with you, Nadine.
Well, likewise, and I hope you have a beverage so that when we get to the glass half full, we can continue our tradition of toasting. So for everybody watching, make sure you've got a little something in your glass for that segment of the show.
This is actually weak tea. It turns out my tea did not fully work out. So I'll be having weak tea, but hopefully the show will not be weak tea because I want to talk about Elon Musk. You may be tired
speaking of weak tea, right? Speaking of weak tea, that's a great segue.
Yes. He's going to love that. Okay, so I have thoughts about Elon Musk. These are not romantic thoughts, just to be clear, since he's apparently trolling the internet for, childbearing women or something. I am not for him in any sense of the word, but I have a number of thoughts, but I think I wanted to start out with a dramatic reading from Consumer Reports. Now, I suspect that no one in the audience has ever experienced a dramatic reading of Consumer Reports. This is actually Consumer Reports right here. This is from April. It's the car buying issue. And, Consumer Reports is one of the most sort of straight-laced, neutral magazines out there, telling you should you buy this refrigerator or not? Should you get that brand of popcorn or not? In this instance, I don't know who wrote the Cybertruck review, but I think it bears reading. The Cybertruck features a polarizing, angular design and paintless, I thought it said pointless the first time I read it, pointless alloy body panels. It has an estimated range of 325 miles, and I'm going to fast forward. It says, the controls are highly distracting. That's what you want in a car, highly distracting controls. It says the controls are highly distracting, partly because the turn signals, wipers, and high beams are controlled by buttons on a tiny squarish steering wheel. I don't know how many of you want a tiny square steering wheel or for your high beams or wipers to be like buried somewhere in teeny tiny buttons, but it goes on. This is the best part. It says the side mirror and steering wheel adjustments are done through the screen. The truck is very quick and relatively nimble, but the steering is non-linear. I mean, sorry about that, but I don't know, one of the things I like about cars is how linear the steering is. I think non-linearity is a problem. So the steering is non-linear, but Consumer Reports is not done. It says, and can be unpredictable. So yeah, I also want unpredictable steering in cars. That's awesome. And then it says the ride is firm yet composed. Outward visibility is atrocious. That's also what you want in a car. No outward or terrible outward visibility. It says, which it makes it difficult to park. I think they're hiding, which might make it difficult to drive. And then they say, but the backup camera can help with the parking. And then it concludes by saying tiny red LEDs at the base of the windshield pillars form a token BSW system. So this is literally, I think, one of the worst reviews I've ever read in all of my reading of Consumer Reports. But that's not all. Obviously, independent of Consumer Reports, the Tesla Cybertruck was the subject of one of the biggest recalls in history. It had, a front panel, this alloy stainless steel thing that was sort of waving like a flag in the wind for some of the trucks. And just this week, there was an earnings report from Tesla, from Musk, basically talking to investors. And it turned out that they've lost like 71%. They're down 71%. Now, in his comments, he made a bunch of statements that were false, in particular, one that I'll single out about claiming that the protests against the Tesla brand and the protests at Tesla lots, that these were paid protesters, that this was paid, but they're not going to admit it, is what he said. That people are not going to admit it. In fact, he said, let me just see if I can grab the quote. He said, the protests are very organized and paid for. I'll tell you what, my dislike of the Tesla Cybertruck is absolutely free. 100%. Zero. And let's just think about Elon Musk. He has this reputation for being a genius. Actually, I have a thought about that too, which is that, wealth is in part, inherited in a substantial way in, globally and in our society. And that wealth or that cushion gives you a lot of room to take risk, more room than people who are living day to day, paycheck to paycheck, et cetera. So when you have the capacity because of your family wealth, for example, from like South African emerald mine or what have you, like you can take risks, and that risk helps you to take big gambles. And some of those big gambles pay off. Like if you were going to go into a casino and spend like, $10 on blackjack, you might make, a 1.5 back if you hit blackjack. But if you put down like $10,000, you'd make another $5,000 on top of it. Like the wealth, the wealth increases incrementally in that way. So Elon Musk is super rich. And so people think that he's super smart. He's actually been in some ways very lucky. However, if you look at his record, and I'm going to talk about the Guinness Book of World Records, which I used to read quite a bit as a child and teenager, but it turns out he's in the Guinness Book of World Records for being the biggest loser in history. He's lost more money than anyone ever has. And that's not counting. That was before Tesla took a tumble because of his Nazi salute and the, I think erection is the wrong word, but the holding up of the chainsaw to, demonstrate his desire to cut through U.S. agencies that provide the American people and our allies in the world a lot of support. But then on top of that, you have Musk saying ridiculous things. Like at one point he was at some cabinet meeting and he said, he's not going to bat 1,000, in all of his cuts. Well, baseball, let's just talk about baseball for a second, because baseball, if you're an awesome hitter, you might hit like 300.3000. That means you're not hitting like 700, 0.700. Like you're hitting 1 out of 3 balls, basically, or actually less than 1. Which means being wrong 2/3 of the time. 2/3 of the time. I think that's actually probably the only really accurate thing he said, because his claims about these agencies, the people he's put in charge of cutting, making changes to Social Security or IRS or invading our systems and things like that. It has just been a sea of incompetence and destruction. So I just want to go on the record and say Elon Musk, like not a genius, lucky, unlucky, and also one of the most destructive guys who's ever been part of government. This idea that he's going to step back, quote, step back and serve for the next 3.5 years in this role, 1 or 2 days at a time. No, thank you. You're fired. We don't want you. No one other than people who are not very intelligent want you to be in charge of cutting government agencies. And then just one last rant. I just have one last thing. I swear, one last thing. He gave $2 million checks, $1 million each, to 2 right-wing activists as part of his sort of scam to try to get people to vote for this Republican person who was running for the Wisconsin Supreme Court. He said it was going to be a lottery. It's not really a lottery. If you look at the check, the $1 million check that he holds up, it says spokesperson. It's not random. He gave it to a woman who was part of a firm that has big business with the GOP, and to like the head of the Young Republicans in Wisconsin. Not random, but $1 million. That $1 million is a lot of money to ordinary people, and it's quite the showmanship, sort of just gamesmanship, BS spin that we see from Elon Musk. But if you think about what that $1 million is for him, his net worth is purportedly like $330 billion. So $1 million to him is 0.00003 of his wealth. That's 5 zeros and a 3. If you look at the like average or median net worth of an American, which would include like their house, that's like, let's call that $1 million. That's like the equivalent of $3.19. $3.19. If you look at that $1 million on the basis of what an average American earns in a year, let's call it like $80,000 a year on average across the country, that's like spending 25 cents a quarter. That's what that man, what was worth a quarter to him, he injected into that race in Wisconsin. He lost. The voters of Wisconsin, by almost a 10-point margin, rejected his candidate and rejected his interference. And so that has made me really happy to see him rejected in that way. That's the end of my rant. Okay, Nadine.
Wow. That was epic. I loved it. I don't even know if there's any meat on the bone for me to gnaw on. I love that people are calling themselves pro bono Tesla protesters in the comments. Excellent.
Thank you.
Yes.
You are.
First quarter profits down 71%. The stock is down, I think, 37%. And the Elon Musk antipathy is not just in the US. The sales are down in Germany like 62%. And yet he is still out here hyping, even as steering wheels come off of his cars and, they burst into flame and all of the things. He is still out here pretending as though he is, that robo-taxis are just around the corner. And this, to me, is the cherry on top, because there's no honor among billionaires, apparently, because in this moment of weakness, Jeff Bezos has just entered the electric vehicle market with a $25,000 electric truck through a new company called Slate Auto that's half the price of a Cybertruck and actually functions like a truck. You can haul things. You can do things other than pretend that your windows are bulletproof.
But does it have non-linear steering? That's what I really want to know.
I think Pointless Alloy is Elon Musk's stripper name. I think that is a beautiful. That's what I'm taking away from this. But you talk about him being lucky. It is so important that people remember that his wealth comes from apartheid, from emerald mines, a family enriched by the exploitation of Black labor in South Africa. And so it's not a shock at all to see him and his, band of incel doge. I can't remember who said we should pronounce it dodgy. Dodgy, not doge. To see them cutting off U.S. aid, the fall of apartheid being tied to U.S. aid, all of these things are, just evidence of somebody who has surrounded themselves with yes men. So we're watching this happen with Tesla. X, Twitter, is worth a fraction of what it was when he put his hands on it. But here's the other thing that this reminds us of. It reminds us to always follow the money, because even as Tesla is plummeting, Elon Musk is the biggest welfare queen there is. His entire fortune is propped up by subsidies and government contracts, and we have a real problem with Trump using tariffs as a shakedown. And one of the ways that other countries are trying to curry favor is by going with Starlink, and we're seeing it with the FAA, where they are canceling their contract with Verizon to give the communication contract to Starlink, and he has already shown a willingness to absolutely use his own, hey, I'll turn off Starlink if I don't like the military decisions that you're making. So this is a very precarious moment, and I wonder if a wounded Elon Musk is an even more dangerous and stupid Elon Musk.
That is a good question, because I mean, I do not want that guy in charge of FAA, anything to do with the FAA. I wouldn't put him in charge of cyber bikes. Like he should not have that responsibility. I'm actually shocked by, how much failure he's had with SpaceX in terms of rockets blowing up over and over and over again. Like, those are our tax dollars, like, going up in flames. So, I just think it is really problematic. And the other part, and I'd love to talk about this another time, but like, when you look at his family, one of the things that happened was they fled Canada to South Africa, and that was, in part over, I guess, the draft or military service, but also, like, his family in Canada was a proponent of ending democracy and having a, quote, technocracy, which is basically what he's trying to impose on the US. And so he, I think, is a dangerous person. He's someone who has misused his power. He has, used that platform on Twitter to basically go after people who, attack him. There was a New York Times story today about how people criticized him on the right, and they were demoted in terms of their stream. They claim that this may or may not be due to him. Meanwhile, he has let the platform be completely taken over by Naziistic, white supremacist, debunked claims. And so, like, that's on brand. And that Hitler salute that he denied, or some of his followers said he was just trolling, it's totally discrediting. And yeah, I'm sure I'll talk about Elon Musk again, but I know we can't spend the whole show talking about Elon Musk.
We can't, but the Nazi salute is a great segue to our next section. And I know we're supposed to put a timer on, aren't we? This is show 2. So
yes, it was me. I meant to put the timer on. Okay, I'm on.
We'll get the timer going. All right. So yes, from Nazi salutes to radicalization, that leads us predictably back to Florida, where there has been yet another mass shooting, this time on the campus of the Florida State University. Another campus, another body count. April 17th, 20-year-old Phoenix Eichner, he opened fire at FSU. 2 people were killed, 6 people were injured. And this is a guy who had a history of posting far-right MAGA-aligned content and used his mom's, I guess his stepmother was a police officer or sheriff's deputy. He used her service weapon. Police found more guns in his bag. This is somebody who was known on campus for posting this outrageous MAGA, right-wing, white nationalist, supremacist rhetoric. And, this is the normalization of this continues to shock and disgust me as somebody who was part of the response in the aftermath of Pulse, worked closely with the students at Parkland in the aftermath of that tragic campus slaughter. Here we are again listening to not just the hollow, phony thoughts and prayers. I mean, Trump's response, for example, was basically a shrug of his shoulders. It was, this is just the price we pay. If young people die, it doesn't matter that guns remain the leading cause of death for children and teens, outpacing car accidents and any illness. And not only has Florida not taken any action, but it has acted to repeal laws passed in the aftermath of Parkland. In Florida, concealed carry is now allowed without a permit, without training. And again, this isn't just about one shooter, but every time we have these extremists, these right-wing extremists who overwhelmingly are the instigators of this kind of slaughter, it gets dismissed as a lone wolf, a troubled, mentally ill, not the systematic radicalization of young men with easy access to weapons that serve one purpose: to kill as many people as quickly as possible. And so I think part of the reason I wanted to talk about it was not to add some new dimension to the conversation, but just to resist the idea that this has become so normal that we don't even mention it anymore.
Yeah, I so appreciate that, Nadine. And it is predominantly young white men who are involved in these shootings. That's just the demographic reality of the situation. And I also think it's so important to not normalize this. And, I basically am. It's fair to say I'm disappointed. the least I could say is I'm disappointed in almost everything Trump says. But this thing where there's actually bipartisan support or transpartisan support for genuine gun reform, for common sense gun reform that has been derailed by the NRA over and over and over again. Most people in America know that we have a serious gun epidemic. They know that it's absurd to have this sort of danger in every environment, churches, shopping malls, going to the grocery store, nightclubs, schools. And yet this sort of right just says thoughts and prayers, and like that's just the way it is. And so it is disappointing. It's been disappointing to see a lot of statements coming out of this White House, but in some ways this is also a stark contrast with Biden in a particular way where, we have previously had presidents of both parties that, expressed grief, sincere and extended grief over these types of tragedies. And now we have someone in the White House who just shrugs it off. And that's a damn shame. And it certainly indicates that in this near term, we're not going to get the type of reforms that are needed to address this crisis. But it's important, like you said, to not just let it go like as a 2-day story and then over. And I heard, Nadine, and I know you've been so involved in politics and policy in Florida, and obviously have been so devoted to addressing these issues. But I heard in the news that some of the kids who were at FSU were from Parkland, and so it has this double effect.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, there are young people who survive Parkland only to find themselves in yet another mass shooting, and this is happening as DeSantis is working to lower the age that you can get a gun, despite the fact that all of the data says if you keep guns out of the hands of minors, you dramatically lower the incidence. They're removing red flag laws that were enacted after Parkland. So it's really, we have to fight the despair that nothing can be done. We really have to continue to push. And I know that I want to bring on our guest because I know that this is something as a fellow Floridian that he has a connection to as well. And our guest tonight is a friend of mine named Rich Logis. He is the founder of Leaving MAGA. He is somebody who was once fully invested in the MAGA movement, rallies, media appearances, podcasts, full support for Trump. But over time, one question after the other led him to quiet quitting. And now, if you recognize him, you might have seen him. He was one of the presenters for Republicans for Harris, and he launched an organization called Leaving MAGA, which is aimed at helping other people walk away and rethink their political identity and expand the places that they get information. So it is a pleasure to welcome you to the show, Rich. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Hi, Nadine. Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me. And congratulations on the show as well.
Yeah, we're excited to have it.
And we're so glad to have you be our second guest ever. It's so good to hear from you and see the work you've been doing, and so glad that you and Nadine are connected.
I am indebted to Nadine for helping in the formation of Leaving MAGA. So I just want to publicly acknowledge all of the assistance. And so thank you, Nadine, for it, because we wouldn't have been able to do what we're doing without your help.
Well, I appreciate that. And why don't we start with you telling folks sort of how Leaving MAGA came to be, because I think there are going to be a lot of people here who haven't heard of the organization, but let folks know how it launched and what kind of resources you provide to people who are trying to get out or are family members and friends of people who want to figure out constructive ways to engage.
So I'm going to open with a point just as a follow-up to the last segment regarding the mass shooting here. One of the lines of demarcation for me that I could not cross any longer in MAGA was the acceptance of avoidable deaths and suffering amongst the Republican Party and President Trump. As much as I hate saying President Trump, but that was one of the reasons for me, along with, there are other factors as well. January 6th, the COVID mismanagement, the election lies. The final straw for me was May 24th, 2022, which was the Uvalde school shooting. And every mass shooting, when I looked back on my time in MAGA and then subsequently after Uvalde, it was always the same response. So it was right after Uvalde when I did quietly quit, but it was in August of 2022, I wrote a public mea culpa, and I said that I was sorry for any words, deeds that may have hurt others, and that I renounced my support for Trump and MAGA and our governor, Ron DeSantis, whom I also worked to get elected. And I did not think that anybody would care. And I realized that many did care. I was oblivious and naive to the fact that so many relationships had been torn asunder by this person and this movement. And so I spent the next year between the summer of 22 and 23 just telling my personal story to whomever would hear it. And usually it was people asking me, as opposed to me soliciting others to hear my own story. People were asking me, and then I had to make a decision in the latter part of 2023, which was, what do I do with all of this? What do I do with my experiences? I've told my story a lot. Do I retire from public life, or do I try to create an actual community? And I made the decision that I felt like we needed to create a destination and an exit ramp for people who are in MAGA, who might be having doubts. Also for friends and family of those who are still in the thrall of MAGA, and also a place for those who did leave, but maybe they didn't publicly tell their story and they felt that they were ready to do that. So at our site, people can visit leavingmaga.org. We've got over a dozen testimonials. They're written, they're videos. There's a whole diverse assortment of people who went through their own unique odyssey getting in and out of MAGA. And so I wanted us to counter the MAGA community, which I do believe is full of mostly good people, but it is a very toxic and traumatic community. We have one where it's about reclaiming your individuality and refinding and rediscovering the good person we were. Because I still think that even though most people in MAGA deep down, they are good people, I don't defend the ignorance. I don't defend the hateful actions and rhetoric. But when I was in MAGA, I allowed myself to become this kind of person, and I dehumanized others and I vilified those with whom I disagreed. And I needed to take responsibility for that, because in order to truly leave, one must take accountability for past actions and rhetoric.
Yeah, if I would jump in, if that's all right, Nadine, I
Sure.
just want to say,
Yeah.
Rich, just deep respect for you. Deep appreciation for your courage and coming forward, and at root for your devotion to rejecting a philosophy that celebrates harming others, that celebrates things like what happened on January 6th, and denies, I think, when I think about humanity, in essence, it's like the thing that actually should unite us all is we all want our kids to be safe and our family to be safe. And we all want to thrive. We want to have harmony and want to have, peace in our society. And with few exceptions, narcissistic personality, like most people really, that's what they want. They want a chance to be happy. They want a chance to be healthy. And I just really appreciate your return, I guess, to your true self of that compassion, and your standing up to encourage other people to return to that true heart of compassion. So thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that and recognizing that that's what we are trying to achieve. I think for most people in MAGA, they they didn't gravitate to the community because of the hurtful rhetoric. There's a variety of reasons that I think people found themselves supporting the president and this movement because they wanted a change from the status quo. For me, I believe both parties were the same. I felt like the entire established political order needed to be obliterated. That was my entree into MAGA. But over time, there's this valid question. Well, why do people stay knowing that there is this kind of vitriolic dehumanizing rhetoric about other people? And while I don't say this as a defense, what I would ask viewers to remember is that for so many in MAGA, they are so heavily invested in this movement, in this community. And I don't mean just financially. I'm talking about in many cases spiritually and personally and politically. And the prospects of acknowledging that they were wrong and the walking away of a community that they have developed as a second family and cultivated as equal in importance to friends and family is really frightening. And it was scary for me. As much as it was difficult and it was liberating, but it was painful for me to realize that so much of what I had believed was wrong. But what was even scarier is that I didn't know where I was going to go. And I give thanks every single day that even though I didn't know where I was going to wind up, my conscience never stopped sounding its alarm, and I walked forward. And I always like to use the visual from the film The Truman Show at the very, very end when Jim Carrey, he realizes that he was living in this controlled, safe environment, and he has a choice to stay there or he can walk through that dark door of dangerous freedom. And I use this visual because I had to walk through that door. And for those who have given their testimonials with us, they went through that door also, even though they knew they didn't, or they didn't know what was going to be on the other side of it. And I want to say also, for those who are watching, that I have received messages recently from people who have come to me and said, Rich, I left MAGA, but I don't know what to do. And thankfully, we have an answer for them with our community, because with us, this is the what to do. This is the exit ramp for them to find that closure for when they finally say publicly, yes, I renounce this movement. It doesn't reflect who I think I am as a person. And so this all happened, Lisa, completely unintended and unlikely and accidental. I could BS everyone and say, yeah, I had a 2-year game plan. And year 1, we were going to do this, and year 2, that. No, this was entirely accidental. And it's not a testament to me. It's really a credit to our team and Nadine supporters such as yourself that we've been able to grow to the point we are now, where we've never been busier.
Well, Rich, you gave me my flowers at the beginning. Let me give you yours in this sense. It was very helpful to me to learn, the first time Rich and I met was at Howard University after I'd given a presentation. We ended up, I think we talked on the stairwell for 45 minutes, but all of it was really eye-opening because the cultish encasement that happens with MAGA is not unique. But what you helped me to see was that while there absolutely were some irredeemably racist people who, gravitated, there were also a lot of people who looked at the time at a presidential ticket that was going to be a Clinton versus a Bush again, and looked at that and said, this is fundamentally broken, and saw Trump as a disruptor who was saying, yep, the system is just as rigged as you think it is. But one of the things that I think about a lot is you were talking about that year of heaven and hell, of quiet quitting, of knowing that, it was the COVID response. It was January 6th. It was a realization that walking away meant walking away from the people that you had birthday parties with, your entire social set. You had burnt your bridges to your former Democratic friends. And so there's this place of absolute isolation. And I'll just give you this quick example. I grew up in the Panhandle of Florida, very conservative place. And I was the senior class president. And so I have not blocked any of my classmates who are deeply in MAGA world. But there was one person who was just, he crossed a line, and I thought, he's about to be the first person that I block from my class. He started posting again just quite recently. And just as I was about to block him, I just sent a note that just said, hey, I noticed that you're posting on everything that I'm commenting on everything I post. Are you okay? It seems like something's wrong. And what came back was like 2 paragraphs of, I'm sorry, I hope you'll forgive me. You're right, I shouldn't be doing this. And I thought of you because you were like, when people are leaving MAGA, they might not look like it. This slow process of leaving can look like doubling down. And I felt like the tiniest crumb of humanity and grace extended in that moment just broke open a different conversation. I'm not telling you he went home and burned all of his MAGA regalia, but it was just, I just want you to know that you swim inside my head sometimes in moments like that, because I had a snarky comment right there on my fingertips. But remembering many of our conversations, I just thought, you know what? This is attention-seeking behavior, and instead of punishing it, I'm just going to extend a small sliver of grace.
Well, thank you for saying that. And I think you've also embodied what I do believe still has merit, which is when they go low, we go high. But we can adjust that a little bit. And you did that. You made a when they go low, we go high adjustment. And doing it, you ask that question, are you okay? Which is not something that he's used to hearing. And my own epiphany, the epiphanies of those who had their road to Damascus moment where the scales fell from the eyes and they left MAGA, it always happens gradually and then suddenly all at once. And I mean, my prognostication is that with everything happening in the country right now, you mentioned Musk, at the outset, Elon Musk broke a lot of what wasn't broken. And real life has been adversely affected for millions of Americans. And I do think that over time, it's going to happen gradually, but then suddenly where more and more Trump voters and even those in the MAGA community are going to start to have uncertainty. And they're going to start to question their obsequiousness to this movement and ask themselves, does it truly reflect who I am? When those doubts commence, we want to be there for them. We want to be the resource where it's okay to say that I'm having doubts, where it's okay to say I'm a little scared right now. I don't know what to do. It's not that we make it easy, but we can make it easier for someone to transition out of MAGA when they start to realize that it isn't what it is. It's not a movement that they thought that they were originally supporting, that it became something that harmed themselves and harmed others. So Elon Musk's way of doing this was fire and then aim. And I also think, just as a Musk comment also, because I had this conversation today, there is this romanticized mythology in America that if someone had business success, that it would translate into success in government. And I think people like Musk and Trump show that is not necessarily true. And I'll say it that way because maybe there are successful business people who would be successful in government, but Musk and Trump show that it's never a guarantee. And part of the reason that they failed, and part of the reason why running America like a business will always fail, is because we are not a for-profit entity. We are a nearly $7 trillion entity, largest in the history of the world, who is equally responsible for 1/3 of a billion people. So the United States does not exist to make money. We exist to protect people, provide the entitlements, what people have paid into, focused on what you said, Lisa, about education, making sure everyone is safe and secure, making sure our rights are upheld and not abridged. This is not what someone like Musk did. He's wanted to cosplay being president And now we had an opportunity to do that. And what was actually achieved? What was achieved was chaos and governmental anarchy. And when I was in MAGA, we like to wreak havoc. You know, that was part, Nadine, of the disruption that you said before. And we got a disruptor. Yes, it's just unfortunately looking back on it, we got one in Trump who was anathema and antithetical to democracy and our democratic lowercase d institutions.
Yeah, that's
I
just,
see.
sorry
I was
about
just
that.
going to say, I see somebody in the comments has talked about Dr. Stephen Hassan, and I know that's somebody that, Rich, you've worked with. I've had the pleasure of interviewing. And while it is not helpful to call people, to tell people to their face that they're part of a cult, it is deeply helpful to learn more about cults, to figure out the ways of talking to people where they can actually hear you rather than double and triple down. And that's true whether it's religious proselytizers knocking on your front door or people who've embraced a political world as their theology. Back to you, Lisa.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, I so appreciate this whole conversation, Rich and Nadine, and I do think this idea, that mythology you point out of if you run a business, you could run government. You know, in some of these businesses, they're like little fiefdoms or big fiefdoms. They're like a kingdom where whatever someone says becomes reality, or someone gets fired. Like it is not a democracy. Those corporations aren't democracies, although there's some shareholder influence, for example, in Tesla world. But that those traits of just dictating things and punishing people who disagree with you, that's not normal in a democracy. That's not consistent with how a democracy needs to operate. A pluralistic, diverse democracy of people who have free speech rights and the right to have different points of view and to debate things like what should the tax rate be, or how do we incentivize this sort of business or this sort of activity. But you are so right that thinking about the government as a for-profit entity is just upside down, because the government does things that the for-profit industry would never do. They would never, you know, make sure that people have access to healthcare when they're older, when it's more expensive, as everyone gets illnesses as they age. That's not profitable. That is why we have Medicare, you know, and so, you know, that's just one of hundreds of examples of how the government plays a role that the private sector will not and cannot do. Same with disasters. The idea that we're just going to leave Americans to just fend for themselves in the face of natural disasters, when we have this wealthy country and this reserve of talent and assets to help protect people and help them when they're at their most desperate, when they've lost their home, when, you know, a storm or a fire has come through. Like, that's not the American way. And so I'm really hopeful that with efforts like yours and others, that, you know, we can come together as Americans and say, this is what America is about. And this sort of selfish sort of I think of Howard Hughes. I know it's a really dated reference, that billionaire who, like, you know, he just sort of went crazy with his wealth and the isolation and ended up in some hotel in Las Vegas with super long fingernails or something, you know, like, because that sort of wealth has such a distorting impact. And we've allowed it in part because we're not taxing the billionaires the way we should. I mean, Warren Buffett, one of the richest guys in the country, has said there's no way he should be paying less in taxes than his secretary. I think most Americans would agree that we need tax reform, but it's not just like making people like Musk more wealthy, but it is also, like you said, this idea of, like, what is a president? Or at least you implied, like, what is the duty of a president to our nation? And that, I think we're going to have those conversations. We're going to have a lot of opportunities to have those conversations in the days and weeks and months ahead.
Rich, we're so glad you joined us. Any parting thoughts before you take off?
Well, thank you again, ladies, for having me. For anyone who wants to get in touch with us, please visit us at leavingmaga.org. We've got our testimonials, all of our socials. Make sure to get subscribed to our newsletter. We have never been more active with our efforts and our energies, and that's a testament to our team. And for anyone out there who's seeing this, who may have friends and family in the MAGA community, I want to encourage you, please don't give up on them. because that loving person you knew before the rise of Trump and MAGA, that person is still there somewhere. So please don't give up on them. If you feel like you need a resource, please turn to us at Leaving MAGA. Come visit us at leavingmaga.org.
All
Thank
right.
you, Rich.
Thanks, Rich.
Thank you.
Take
so
My
care.
much.
pleasure. Thanks, ladies. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thanks.
You too.
Wow, Nadine.
right.
Wow, what
Yeah.
a guest. That was so illuminating and so heartfelt. I'm so grateful for your initiative on that.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of government and people who have no business being in government, how's that for my segue?
Yeah, that was good. Well,
to
you know,
our-
okay, so I've got another rant. It's true. Like
Yes.
I swear to you, I won't always have two rants about two dudes in government, but today I do.
Don't make that promise. Lisa, don't make that promise.
All right, well, it may happen
Okay.
again and again. That's highly likely to happen again and again. Okay, but Pete Hegseth, the news today that sort of took over the other more serious headlines was that he had basically required the construction of a makeup room or a powder room, as Greg so well put it, a powder room, and the Pentagon for his media appearances, because that's a high priority. You know, he's got to have the hair and makeup artist there and the little, you know, flag pendant or flag thing tucked into his lapel, so he can pretend like he's, you know, competent when he's sort of like a you know, character out of central casting of a really, you know, bad movie in terms of who is in charge of the Defense Department. But like in some ways, this powder room thing, it's the sort of thing that people can kind of get their mind around, like this sort of vanity that represents compared to substance. But the substance is big. And, you know, because of the way the media works on these 24-hour cycles, and there's always something new, and Trump is, you know, one of his sort of, I wouldn't say evil genius, but one of his expertises is just, you know, causing chaos and more headlines and more new, you know, more attention to the next thing. You know, we've sort of lost the conversation about Signalgate 1, and then it turns out there was Signalgate 2. So there's not just the first use of this app to communicate actual troop movements, war plans to a crowd on an app, not actually through the secure lines that these things are supposed to happen, including a journalist, but also including a guy who was in Russia, you know, near Putin at the time, which is fundamentally extremely dangerous. But also then there's a second signal chat where Hegseth was sharing information from a secure computer with his wife and his brother or brother-in-law and his lawyer, people who aren't cleared, who do not have letter clearance or top secret clearance for any of this stuff, but who were included because it's like he thinks, it seems like to me, I'm just going to opine here, that these, you know, that he just gets to like sort of tweet to his friends like that he's a big man, you know, and he's, you know, doing all this war stuff and how great he is, you know, and, you know, somehow the tattoos are supposed to, you know, kind of help him, you know, with that image. But he really is someone who should not be trusted with our nation's secrets, with responsibility for protecting our nation. He is engaged in violations that other service members would either be decommissioned or would be court-martialed for. These are now, of course, the Pentagon is not headed by, you know, by law. The Pentagon cannot be helmed by someone who is currently in the active military. It has to be a civilian appointee, and so he can't be court-martialed. But if he were in the military engaging in this behavior, he would be subject to court-martial. He could be subject to imprisonment at Leavenworth for this type of reckless disregard for our security. And on top of it, you have a situation on that first Signalgate where he literally is texting troop movements. Now, in U.S. law, under the First Amendment, there's a whole set of cases about this because sometimes the government wants to limit a publication. They want to limit a reporter from reporting on something. And so there's a thing called a prior restraint. And in general, the government cannot, you know, issue a prior restrain the press from reporting on something because of the freedom of press that's guaranteed, you know, in the First Amendment of our Constitution. But there's an exception. The exception is the government can tell a newspaper not to publish troop movements. That is the one major exception to the First Amendment's free press rules. And so you have this bozo at the helm of the Defense Department tweeting, or not, tweeting through Signal, like signaling troop movements, where our service members were, where they're bombing and the area where they're, and when they're about to bomb. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole issue of, the Houthis and kind of the what was happening in the Middle East in terms of the underlying issue. The issue is, and there are issues of what should our foreign policy be, but the issue here is that we have someone at the helm of the Pentagon who cannot be trusted with the information he has access to. And there should be consequences. He should lose his job. He should be impeached. I don't have any hope that this House will impeach him because the Republicans are in charge of it, or that the Senate will would convict him in an impeachment trial. If the president, Trump, had any integrity, he would call for his resignation, demand his resignation for his capricious and reckless handling of our nation's secrets. That would absolutely happen if there were any credibility in this White House in terms of its devotion to our national security. And these senators who pushed him through, Tom Tillis in North Carolina, who is up next year. He is up for a return to the Senate. He needs to be turned back. Every veteran in that state, every citizen in that state who cares about our national security should vote Tom Tillis out of office. Out of office. Now, the rumor in Washington, D.C. was that he was ready to vote against Hegseth, but basically there was a carrot and stick. They would primary him if he did, meaning Trump and his team would primary him, and Musk would throw money in against him, or that they would give him $1 million for his campaign for re-election. That to me sounds inherently corrupt. That was the sort of rumor on the street. I don't know whether it's true or not. I'm just saying he switched. He seemed like he was ready to vote against Hegseth. He had been ready to call Pete Hegseth's former sister-in-law, who was ready to testify about how Hegseth was abusive toward his second wife and cheating on her also. He, Tillis at the last second turned tail and helped put Hegseth into office. Joni Ernst, a person who is a Republican, who was a service member, who had to deal with, a sexual assault herself. They bullied her into supporting this man for this job at the Pentagon, despite the fact that he had paid a $50,000 settlement with someone who accused him of basically roofing her and sexually assaulting her. And then you have the Koch world. There was a great and really penetrating story really deep story by Jane Mayer, where she wrote about Hegseth and his previous roles before he became a Fox commentator, where you basically audition for Trump all the time, where he was leading a group that was funded by Charles Koch's billion-dollar empire called Concerned Veterans for America. They trotted out to basically try to put Gorsuch on the Supreme Court and pretend like they're really concerned about veterans while they're trying to cut the government cut benefits for veterans and that sort of thing. They were big on pushing for VA reform. There's definitely a need for VA reform, but a lot of that was toward privatization. Anyway, when Hegseth was leading Concerned Veterans for America, he was reportedly, according to the New Yorker story, routinely drunk, routinely making, anti-Muslim, statements like kill the Muslims. He was wasting the money of Charles Koch so much that, according to the New Yorker, he basically was asked to leave that job. And now he's in charge of one of the biggest agencies basically the biggest agency in the entire federal government. And in the last 100 days, not only Signalgate 1 and Signalgate 2 and the powder room, but he also has presided over the reckless destruction of our history by ordering the deletion of anything related to DEI, which we talked about last time, like the temporary deletion of the Enola Gay, because the plane that dropped a bomb on Japan had the word gay in it. And the deletion of history, which they restored some of that to the web pages. But we have someone who has spent more time, it seems, on getting a makeup room constructed than in following the national security guidelines that protect our most important and sensitive information. He spent more time basically ordering the deletion of American history than actually following the rules that apply to the Secretary of Defense and everyone down to anyone who enlists in terms of how you handle information to secure our nation. And he has also been involved in utter and contemptuous responses to the press, claiming that even asking him about Signalgate 2 is somehow a smear, when it's just the truth. And I'll quote a famous movie, he can't handle the truth. That's Pete Hegseth.
Whew, coming in hot. I love it. I just want you to know I'm team rant, along with most of the people in the comments. I know he was interviewed on the lawn of the White House on Easter for the Easter egg roll. And people made a point of zooming in on the faces of his kids when he was talking, and because they weren't buying it either. And they could not. I will play poker with his children because they gave it all away on their faces. But it's important to put this in context. There is no better ad for the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion guidelines than the utter incompetence of Pete Hegseth. I mean, you want to talk about a legacy hire, a hire with no qualifications whatsoever, a guy with white supremacist tattoos, who did make a priority not simply of removing the history, but removing, Black generals and removing women and non-whites from command and leadership. He is the absolute epitome of why, without diversity, equity, and inclusion guidelines, the incompetence rises to the top. But here's my question for you. There are people who are saying that this was a bridge too far. He has, they're calling him a DUI hire, not a DEI hire. They call him either Whiskey Pete or Whiskey Leaks. There's many people saying, whatever promise he made to stop drinking, this is, typical behavior of somebody who can't stop drinking, is to promise that they will. But last week we began to hear deeper rumblings that he would be gone. And despite the fact that Trump seems to have embraced him and doubled down his support, is that just the thing they do right before they cut your throat? Is that just the mob boss's kiss before they, off you in the canoe?
I mean, it could be. And that was such a great Godfather reference. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it could, Trump, there are times when Trump, has doubled down behind people who've been accused of sexual assault before. Like now we have Brett Kavanaugh on the U.S. Supreme Court, for example. And obviously he was unfazed by that in terms of Hegseth's nomination. But this could be, in the swirl of things that are discrediting and losing, sort of political capital for Trump, this could be, this period could be the period right before Hegseth loses that job and returns to being a Fox commentator, Fox personality. So that's possible. And our nation would be safer if he were not the head of the Defense Department. I'm 100%, certain of that. And I really appreciate your pointing out that, like, this is like not qualified white guy chosen for a job. This is exactly why we should have, thorough reviews for appointments that include people from all backgrounds, all races, and not just have some dude who's, sucked up to the president get the top job. I mean, that's not a meritocracy. And notwithstanding his, time in the ROTC and his limited service abroad, the fact is that his real credential is that he was on Fox, basically touting and supporting Trump on a regular basis. That doesn't show actual qualification to lead our military, to protect us, from the threats we face from abroad, and to ensure that internal rules in terms of the operations of the military are followed, and those norms are followed, and that the military is not deployed against the U.S. citizenry, against the people in the United States. We need someone who is competent and who has integrity at the helm of the Defense Department of the United States, no matter what party is in the White House. And we do not have someone who has those qualifications, in my view. And there are plenty of, Trump could have chosen dozens of other people who are Republicans to helm the Defense Department, but he wanted a loyalist, a sycophant, someone who would just basically, say, look the part on TV, which is why this makeup studio, this powder room is so on brand.
Absolutely. Well, all right.
Yeah. Now wait,
we're coming in.
Yes,
we're coming into the home stretch, everybody.
Yes.
We're coming into the home stretch.
Yes.
And for our last segment, before we leave you with your glass half full, I guess the first thing I want to say is I don't think that J.D. Vance killed Pope Francis. I don't think that's what happened.
I'm with you.
So
I'm with you on that.
I'm not saying that. I just want to be clear. I'm not saying he killed the Pope. All right. I'm just saying that the last footage we have of the Pope had J.D. Vance in it. That's all I'm saying. I will say this. I'm not a Catholic, but of the popes of my lifetime, Pope Francis was certainly the most humane. We watched him push the Catholic Church in a much more humane direction. He spoke out for migrants. He recognized the urgency of climate change. He spoke out against nationalist politics. He called for greater humanity between the church and the LGBTQ community. He stood on indigenous land and apologized for colonialism. Again, even if imperfectly, this was the best pope of my lifetime. And the scary thing about the death of the Pope isn't simply that J.D. Vance was in the room with him, but it's what it could mean. Like, who will emerge from the conclave? Because there has been a really intense battle against Pope Francis from within the Catholic Church, from the Opus Dei wing, from the J.D. Vance wing, accusing him of liberalizing the church, calling him a danger to traditional values. He's somebody who stopped basically letting priests who abused children and the vulnerable just relocate. I mean, he did things that many had not done, again, imperfectly, but Pope Francis had been something of a global counterweight to extremism, like a moral emergency brake, slowing the rise of authoritarian theology. But with his health declining, it's not simply his death, but his declining health for a long period of time has meant that the right-wing pressure has been mounting. And now the question is, what comes next? And will they be able not just to undo his work, but actively weaponize the church against the very people Pope Francis tried to bring in? So that is the smoke that arises out of the chimney. We don't know whether that's going to signal someone who has taken on the baton of Pope Francis, or the distress signal of a Catholic Church that may return to the worst parts of its history.
Yeah, I so appreciate that, because I really liked Pope Francis a lot, and I thought for all the reasons that you described, with one exception, which was that he claimed that childless couples were selfish, and that having pets was selfish. I think animals represent sort of the best of humanity in some ways. They don't have the same faults and flaws that human beings do in terms of their love and goodness. But other than that, I felt like he really, really tried to protect ordinary people and to speak up for ordinary people and speak out against greed and lack of compassion and deceit. It makes me sad that in his last hours on earth, he had to spend any time with J.D. Vance. That just seems like a real bummer. Like, if you're like, how could I spend my last 24 hours? I'm 100% certain that any time, even like a millisecond with Vance, would not be on the list. Although, because he was devoted, so devoted, maybe he'd said some things to Vance that will help him or penetrate, through the just grotesque lack of compassion of someone who would defend the claims about immigrants eating cats and dogs that were total lies, and then defend the lie as necessary. Like, that's Vance. So he definitely needed a talking to by a pope. But I am worried for the reasons you say, that the Opus Dei wing, that the J.D. Vance, Kevin Roberts from Heritage Foundation, Leonard Leo, that wing, that repressive, regressive wing that wants to draw the church back to darker days, could be ascendant in this demise of this pope. And I had so hoped that he'd bounce back, that he could really, like the Energizer Bunny, just kind of make it through these next 4 years and stand as a moral voice against rising authoritarianism, against aggressive international military intervention, in favor of the rights of refugees and immigrants. And unfortunately, like you said, we're going to see whether this church goes back to the Pope Benedict sort of style leader, a more repressive leader, whether it stops cleaning up the disastrous mess that it created in terms of allowing these priests to move around who had been abusers. And also, one of the things that Pope Francis did was try to address the overreach of Opus Dei, and also some of the financial mismanagement that was happening through one of the related offices and other offices within the church. And we'll see if those reforms are halted by his successor. But I join you, Nadine, in expressing deep sorrow for the loss of someone who I think was genuinely a good person, a good man, and probably the best pope that we've ever, not just in our lifetime, but possibly the best pope that has ever been.
Well, and with that, I think it's time to segue to our glass half full.
Yes. All right. I think it's on me. Okay. So before we go, we end, as always, now with our second show, with the glass half full. Nadine?
And yes,
right.
The glass half full, because it's a reminder, especially as we handle these difficult moments, these challenging times, that we have to hold on to that cup of hope.
Yes. So last week we told you about Let Freedom Ring, which was an effort spearheaded by the Center for Media and Democracy. I'm the board president there, but I don't run the organization. Arne Pearson leads that organization. He spearheaded a nationwide effort to have churches ring a bell for freedom, starting with the North Church in Boston last week to mark the beginning of the Revolutionary War that helped secure America from tyranny, from royal tyranny. And so we just have a little 45-second clip from one of those bell ringings, and it comes from Deep Red, Texas, that we wanted to share with you as we close out this segment. Should we do a toast now to the glass half full? And then we'll do the video, and then we'll do our out. So Nadine, and to all of our viewers, we have to remember the glass is half full, and we have the power to make things better. So to you all.
Cheers.
All right, now let's see if I can share my screen. So hold on a second here. Bear with me. All right, share screen. Okay, audio on.
I ring this bell for America, for the immigrants, 250 years of them that came before, for the Native Americans who came before and are still with us, for our Constitution, for our democracy, for the rule of law, for all, for free speech, for everyone. Thanks to everyone who came before. It's now up to you and I to carry on.
How you guys feeling today?
That's the dog show. Hold on. Hold on. I got to stop sharing my screen. Hold on.
Hey, you know what, though? That was perfect, though. That was perfect. Because nothing is more hopeful. Nothing is more hopeful than that.
Okay, stop. I'm so you. Sorry. I'll get it down. I'll get it down next time, I promise. That is actually my favorite 2-dog routine. You should really check it out one of these times. Maybe we'll use that for one of the moments of hope next time. But anyway, okay. So hold on. Here we go. We got to do our out, which is I'm Lisa Graves.
And I'm Nadine Smith. Thanks for making space for the 5, 8 and a half, your midweek breather. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we will see you next Wednesday at 8 o'clock Eastern.
Oh, in credits.